So the one item I'm looking at here is this flag.
Mm-hmm.
So the screen that we're looking at here is just a pipeline page. Nothing really specific about the pipeline page except for this word DAST scan.
Mm-hmm.
And actually this piece right here. The issue I have with this DAST scan is that this is where we have a very select set of labels that show up. So if we look at pipelines here, there's only a few labels that show up, like latest and let's take a look. So latest shows up here. The other ones that can show up are YAML, error, I think interrupted. And these are only labels that would define the state of the pipeline.
Okay.
So if we added this DAST scan, I love this design. I love the idea of having this DAST scan here, but it doesn't fit with the other words and labels that are showing up here.
Right.
And that's my concern, is if we introduce a new label here that is not pipeline related, it's almost more description of the pipeline as opposed to status of the pipeline, that we may get some pushback when we go to do a merge request. So if we want to put a label here, and I really do like the idea, is that we would introduce, instead of DAST scan, it would be something like on demand or web initiated or something to that effect.
Okay.
Maybe web initiated would be a good example. So if we look at, this is another, if we look at, this is just the GitLab pipelines. You'll have some that are detached as another one.
Right.
And detached means it's running, I've had to look this up. Detached means it's a pipeline that's running on a merge request. And so you can see that's going to show up here. And so I do think it makes sense because we are instantiating this pipeline in a very new way than the rest of the GitLab. Just as detach is referring to it if it's a pipeline for a merge request, we now have a pipeline for a web instantiated job. So I think we could, a really solid, consistent nomenclature could be introduced here for like web instantiated that would fit with the rest of the words that are
Makes
there.
sense. Yeah.
But I don't think DAST scan would work because, you know, saying DAST scan or latest or detached, right? It's apples and oranges kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good to point out.
And this is one of the things that I want to open up an issue for our documentation. I could not find anywhere that this entire dictionary is listed in our documentation, which is the reason I hadn't commented yet. Was I think there's like 6 or 7 different labels that I found that are available here, and it's not documented in a single spot in our documentation. So if we introduced, you know, web instantiated, that might make a lot of sense because that's kind of metadata about the type of pipeline.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that, I'll have to think about the wording a little bit because you could argue technically that, you know, a lot of the pipelines, like if you rerun a pipeline or manually run a pipeline, that would be web instantiated as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
so we need a word that define, our pipeline does not exist in the YAML file that we're going to run. So it's programmatic instantiation instead of, you know, the declarative from the YAML file, something to that effect. And I think that's what we're trying to get across here. Now, what's tricky, okay, so this text I think is coming from the merge request. let's see, this one is, I have to look at, I guess this is the merge request description. Or maybe the commit message.
Oh yeah, it might be.
What I'm thinking, at least for our MVC, is not to have this page and not think about this page and how it's going to get designed. So for our MVC, this pipelines page would just be whatever GitLab gives us, and we wouldn't mess with it. Because what we have to do if we want to have this design in our MVC, we then have to create this is, I believe, the commit message from here, but we don't have a commit, right? There's no commit that's happening, and then this label doesn't exist. So that's a bit of work to update this pipeline page. And then what's weird about this is we need to think about this generally, because if we go and try to modify the pipeline page, which of course affects all of GitLab, and it's here's the pipeline code, oh, and then here's an if statement for DAST, that's not going to follow the development pattern.
Right.
I do think we could potentially say, okay, here's the pipeline page, and oh, here's code for user web instantiated scans or user instantiated jobs. And here's the text that's associated with it, and here's potentially a label. But we need to make it a little bit more generic than calling it for DAST scans.
Right. Yeah, I agree. The wording is the toughest thing for me, because, and especially since everybody's got their own opinion, I'm going to have to figure out how to convince Sam, because this will affect fuzzing as well. Because if we create this paradigm now, it's going to have to work for the fuzzing on demand one-off scans.
Yeah. And so this carries on to the next page here, right? This has got the label, and Camelia's got this exactly right. The labels that are showing up here show up on this page. Now, again, this would require a bit of work, right? To say no commit. And this is what I would say is post MVC.
Yeah.
So what we would do is we would attach this to if we did nothing, we would attach this job to master. It would show up like this, pound 145, whatever. And then this would just be whatever the text is from the master branch. And that's what I'm proposing we do for the MVC. It'll work. Users will get the results. They can go into the master branch. They can see. It's not quite as clean of saying, hey, this came from a non-traditional pipeline, but we can get this done. And then kind of as our next iteration, we say, okay, let's make this a little bit more clear.
That makes sense. And then you're basically attaching it as a pipeline to the previous MR commit, so that you can just make it easier for the MVC.
Yep.
Yeah.